hybrid. Yeah. The hybrid. Yeah. The hybrid. Yeah. The hybrid. The hybrid.
Hey everybody, welcome back to the latest episode of The Hybrid. I'm joined as always by my friend, former colleague, and cannabis regulator extraordinaire, Erik Gunderson. I, as always, am Shawn Collins, the former executive director of Massachusetts. So together we bring you essentially the Northeast market of cannabis from a regulatory standpoint. So we also don't have a guest today, so things could get weird. We could get in a little bit of trouble. But we thought it's been a while since the two of us had a chance to check in on camera, probably. And so let's see what happens. Let's do it live. Like I said, no guest, but we're going to talk about some state markets. And in particular, we're going to zoom in on Virginia, because if you've been following anything with respect to cannabis regulation and potential new markets, Virginia has been, I'd say probably Virginia and Pennsylvania have been ground zero for speculation as to what the market could and should look like. Adults can legally possess cannabis in Virginia, but they still don't have a legal adult use market to buy from. And that's what happens when legalization gets treated like a political finish line instead of the beginning of an administrative build-out. You might know that Governor Spanberger vetoed legislation that would have launched their adult use market there. She did so, saying that the bill did not have the structure, the resources, the enforcement authority, testing rules, inspections, and compliance framework that were necessary to stand up a responsible market. That's pretty fair. Anyone who's helped run a cannabis agency knows that weak enforcement, especially enforcement authority, is not a minor drafting problem. It's the thing that eventually becomes everyone's problem. But delays also have their cost. Cannabis does not wait patiently for government to finish its homework. Consumers, they keep consuming. Products, they'll continue to move. Informal markets will continue to keep adapting. And by the time you finally get around to creating your system, regulators aren't starting from scratch. They're trying to pull an existing market into the daylight. And that's the messy middle part of legalization. That's what Erik and I are going to talk a little bit about today, because the votes are pretty clean. The press releases, those are pretty clean. The quotes are nice. But implementation, which Erik and I both lived, is where things get pretty complicated. Testing labs and product safety, track and trace, packaging, local control, equity, taxes, enforcement, market access, political pressure, you name it, regulators are kind of juggling it and dealing with it. And those are the pieces that determine whether legalization is actually successful or not. So today we're going to have a little bit of fun with that reality. We'll talk about the headlines. We'll play a game of Would You Rather Regulate. We'll draft 3 policy foundations. And if you have any history with our drafts, you know that there'll be some things out of potentially left field, like the Pope or Oprah. And we'll start talking about how us as former regulators, living a few years outside of that space, might be doing things either differently or the same way than our colleagues across the country. So, Erik, without any further ado, let's get into it. Good to see you as always, and no guest today, but I think we might have some coming up, right?
Yeah, no guests today, but I mean, we've done well with no guests. I think we'll be okay. And we put together a fun agenda or run a show or segments, whatever you want to call them. So hopefully it's not just Shawn on his soapbox droning on and on about some specific policy he's passionate about, but keep it fun and exciting. But with the no guests, we do have a couple good guests coming up, and I think we've gotten commitments where we can tease them at the end. So something to look forward to, but I think Virginia is the great place to start. Obviously made some of the bigger headlines. I'm sure yourself, myself, others in the space have been tracking that closely. And I think you did a good recap as far as what the action the governor took, why she took it. And I will say I go back and forth on it. One, she made me look a little bit foolish in my looking into my crystal ball and giving predictions to some colleagues and clients, basically saying, I don't think there is any political way she can veto this. And then she goes and vetoes it. But she had some good reasons to. As far as like, one of the things she said was, we want to learn from other states, which all too often these legislatures will put together these programs in a silo and actually not do that type of due diligence or research. I totally get that, and she has some legitimate arguments for the things that she's going to be advocating for. I think probably the rest of this year and next year, ahead of whatever that proposal may look like. Um, but the other part of me, you brought it up, is the latency period between it being legal to possess and use cannabis and then actually having a regulatory system to procure legal regulated adult use cannabis. And our friend and colleague Mackenzie Slade over at Cannabis Public Policy Consulting actually did some fascinating research on this. And I mean, one of the underlying policy objectives of a legal market is to transition the illicit or traditional market into the new one, the tested, the tracked, the regulated system. And a lot of her research and findings shows that the longer there is that period between legalization and actual regulatory structure in order to purchase it, the harder it is to bring those folks in. And Virginia's been in that space for a long time. So it's going to
Yeah.
be really interesting to see where they start off. I think there's probably going to be a lower typical adoption, a slower rate of moving folks over. But if they understood that and knew that, there are levers that they can put into place. There are policy approaches they can take in order to help with that challenge that they're going to see. So I think that's my biggest concern for them. But as far as the things she brought up, yeah, you want to make sure you have proper enforcement authority before day one. You want to make sure that you have testing requirements. I mean, I've said it 1,000 times. Within every state regulatory program, the testing regime is always the weakest link in the chain. Um, so she's not wrong in what she's saying, but I think it's like you're damned if you do, you're damned if you don't. So it'll be interesting to see how they move forward, what that looks like, to get out of that gray area, to start moving folks into that regulated marketplace. But hopefully there's a shared understanding of where they are and where they need to go between the new administration and the legislature. So
I ask you a question on that because I think you're right that she's not wrong, and those are all perfectly valid reasons to be cautious and concerned and um, very vigilant in implementation, and also I would say the negotiation of actual lawmaking too. To be fair, like not just saying we'll figure it all out down the road either, because you don't want to pass such an open-ended bill that's like, what does it even say? Like there's so many gaps and that sort of thing. But at the same time, I think I've always described it as kind of living at the intersection of policy and politics, where she's also a Democratic governor, a former congresswoman who ran essentially on legalization.
yeah,
And, one of the first vetoes you issue is on sort of a significant bill that you probably garnered a good deal. Virginia is one of those purple states. I mean, I'd say it's pretty blue, but it has just came out of 4 years of a Republican governor who wanted nothing to do with legalization, and she was kind of the counterpoint to that. So I'm just curious about your thoughts, if there are any, on, because I certainly have some, which is like that's a very risky political calculation for a new governor, fresh interacting with a new sort of like she's a former legislator herself as a member of Congress, now stepping into the executive going like, got some concerns here, veto. Like that's politically, I'm sure she's paying a bit of a backlash for some constituents that she made promises to. And part of that is courage to actually veto it. But some of it is, like here are the Democrats getting in their own way again and letting the details, kind of, letting the details actually be the devil here. Like perfect
yeah,
is the enemy of good sort of thing.
yeah. I mean, you brought it up, like, and I said it, like I predicted there was no way that she could actually veto it because of the
Yeah.
political backlash and all of those different voter groups, stakeholder groups, allies that she was partnering with and campaigning on and saying these things. But I think it has to be like just all right, I'm the governor now. And the reality of the fact is, like, I don't want to be the one that has ownership over a failed implementation. Do I think they would have failed? No. I think the bill itself had like the core components in order to be successful. But I would imagine if I put myself in her shoes or any governor's shoes, like a lot of the times what they're dealing with it's state capitals, the legislatures, governor's office, or they're bigger than cannabis, right? They're public health issues, they're state budget issues, and cannabis is kind of an afterthought, even though it's a major project. It's going to be
Hmm.
a major program that's run under her leadership. So to come to the reality with, all right, now we have to actually do this. She did the calculus and was like, this is not going to be as successful, I guess, as what she wanted it to be from day one. So she made that incredibly politically risky move to veto it. But I will say for her though, and I can't imagine it helps her with her relations in the legislature, but some of the talking points coming out of like the Senate bill author and the administration is they're going to engage earlier. The legislature is actually going to consider and walk through some of her recommendations in the in the original when she sent it back to the legislature that from what I read, were just dismissed. So
Yeah,
hopefully
right.
this is an opportunity. Democrats, get your asses together in line, organized to do this. Because to your point, yeah, like Democrats tripping over themselves to do this stuff, it doesn't make us look good. But hopefully it's an opportunity to come together and move forward a really well thought out proposal. Um, and shameless pitch, I hope they reach out to ask our opinion
Yeah.
on how to actually do this. Cause I mean, after you've done it with, I think 5 or 6 states, like there are those common pitfalls. There are tricks of the trade. Uh, there are things you can do to avoid some of those doomsday scenarios that you see in some states pop up. And you don't see in other states because you're able to be flexible and pivot and adjust and get around them. So again, she brings up good points. It is what it is now. So hopefully
I
they
always, uh, I always struggled when I worked in the legislature. I always drafted very narrowly. I didn't know the regulator. I didn't like they were this nameless, faceless bureaucrat that I just didn't trust because I didn't know them. And I thought they need to do it exactly precisely this way with zero flexibility. And then I became a regulator and I'm like, what a bunch of jerks. Like, why don't they just give me like give me like multiple choice even, or just give me discretion, God forbid. And I realize now, obviously, there's a healthy balance there where as you are crafting these statutes, you're thinking, all right, what enforcement authority do I want? What enforcement authority don't like? What don't I know? What do I know? What do I want to ensure that I see? Do I want license caps? Yes or no? Do I want a possession limit? Yes or no? Do I want these things sort of baked? What's my tax rate? Like those are things that I think are major policy pillars that you need to stand up your program, but sort of the interior decorating of the program. Like you build the frame, we'll fill out the house. And I think the filling out the house part really does need some discretion because you and I both realized when we were going through our own version of that in our respective states that things change and we learn as we go and we don't always get it right the first time. And we need that ability to come back and adapt. But also I'd say we as regulators too need a rapport with our legislators as well, because one of the things I observed, and I'm sure you dealt with it too, and I know states are continuing to deal with it, is when operators and licensees don't love some of your rules, they're going to appeal to the legislature because they realize they've got that political lever now that they can go pull. And now you are getting the phone call from a senator or from a rep who's going, I'm going to file a bill to take away that authority that we gave you. And so that ebb and flow and that sort of push and pull of legislating, regulating, broader umbrella policymaking, I think is a very engaged process, but it's also so iterative that you've got to you've got to start, you've got to go at some point. And I think, like you said, Virginia's been one of those states that's been at the starting line for years.
Yeah, I love the example of getting the call from the senator. I would have loved to get that call as opposed to so often just being
Seeing
blindsided
the
with terrible
bill.
legislation. Yeah, they're
Yeah.
like, "What? Wait a minute, what's this title?" And then you read it, you're like, "Good lord!
An
Like this
act
could have been
relative to
handled.
dog shit.
This could have been handled with an easy phone call. Like you're trying to address a problem that doesn't exist. And it's going to make anyway.
Exactly.
That's a whole different
Yeah.
conversation.
Why should medical markets test? Yeah.
Yeah. We should have put that on the agenda. I got some thoughts around that. Anyway, but you bring up a really good point when you're building the house. You're talking about where do we want flexibility versus where do we want things to be crystal clear. And we used to do that in our rules. Like we would leave broad interpretation where we felt like as an agency we needed discretion or we needed time or we needed the flexibility to address those things. And then you can identify where in rules do we want things that are crystal clear, black and white. There's no and or ifs about it. So we can make sure that we can take enforcement action or whatever action it may be, right? Like primarily when you're talking about testing or like anything that I'm thinking like packaging, labeling. You can be pretty descriptive with that stuff to ensure you're protecting public health and safety, but there are operational areas and other areas where you want the flexibility. But the same thing goes a level up with the legislature. And both you and I live this world too. Like I worked with the committee that helped draft the statute in Maine before drafting the rules and implementing. But there
So it's
are
literally
areas.
all your fault, therefore,
Yeah,
in
well,
Maine.
no,
Yeah.
that we have an amazing adult use program. Yes, yeah, well, it's all my fault. Uh, but it's the same thing. Like, where where does the legislature want to make sure that they're super prescriptive around things that they're passionate for? And obviously, there's politics that get messy. Like, you're going to have some things you may not want in there in order to pass it. I understand that, but a lot of it is where can we kind of punt this? And punt's probably not the right word, but down to the agency to fill in the gaps with rule. Because if you get overly prescriptive in something, that could gum up the whole system. Like there's just it's at this point we have a pretty good understanding of how to do this. But again, when you're talking about these siloed legislatures making these decisions, I mean, they're not pulling in ex regulators or legislators from other places to the level in which they need to in order to make it perfect. Um, but it doesn't need to be perfect, but you can get there. You can get pretty close. But yes, I'm a huge advocate for making sure that you're super descriptive in the things that you feel like you need in order to pass or to feel comfortable with having an adult use cannabis program within your state. But also a huge advocate for leaving a lot of the discretion to the agency, the ones that are like living it, breathing it, eating it day to day. So they have the flexibility to make it work.
And I think
Yeah.
one area where I'm wondering, one of the things that she said as part of her veto message and her press availability or comments afterward was that she talked to other states and she kind of got some wisdom from them. And it struck me, I'm thinking to myself, like, if she called Massachusetts per se, like, let's use them as an example. And like, who did she call? Did you call the governor? Because they didn't oversee our day-to-day stuff. Like, if you called our old governor, he probably doesn't have a lot of nice things to say about cannabis because he was opposed to the ballot question. But he also wasn't intimately involved in the day-to-day operations such that he could say success failed. Like, he would have a perception, and by all means it would be relevant and sure illuminating, but it's not maybe the on the ground detail that would say, should we do this, yes or no? Or what do you think about this clause in our bill? So I also wonder, when you say you talk to other states, it's like, well, who did you talk to, and what authority and or proximity did they have to that program? Because, I think respectfully, governors deal with political issues. That's very much the nature of the job, but they're doing it at 30,000 feet for an entire array of topics. Just like, the governor in Maine, same thing. And I always enjoyed a good, productive relationship with our governor's office, both parties too. Um, but they weren't sitting in our office, and they weren't dealing with the same stress levels that I was dealing with respect to overseeing the program. And they probably didn't have that granular level of detail. So I also think it matters, like you said, talking to former regulators specifically, selfishly, of course, too, but specifically is going to be really valuable just to glean out, like, these are the things I wish I had for authority, or these are the things that I couldn't do without. If I didn't have them, we would not have been successful. One thing I want to get your perspective on, though, is I kind of touched on it, that there's going to be this gray market, this informal market that is still there. Obviously, possession's still legal, and they have a medical market, and they've got sort of these districts or zones or regions that they've carved the state up into. But as time goes on, that informal market just continues to solidify, strengthen, broaden, or just exist. The job of the regulator is that much harder now, in my opinion, because the longer you let it sit idle, I just think the harder it's going to be to pull that size of a market into your legal market. Not to mention the proximity, right? Like, they're surrounded by legal markets now, whereas if they pulled the trigger a couple of years ago, they could be a market leader by now.
Yeah, they're kind of differentiate two things between like the effort and difficulty of launching a market, like the nuts and the bolts, the implementation plans, the building systems, the scaling agencies. That's the same regardless. All very difficult to navigate still, and challenging to put together. It's the pressures that are going to build on whoever it is overseeing the program in the future in Virginia. To your point, they're going to be when they launch. I always said it like this, and I actually stole this from a friend and former colleague. Like they will be throwing a party, and people are going to come.
Yeah. Yep.
They're just not going to open up this market, and then it's going to be crickets. Like people are going to come, but what I fear for them, again, what we're talking about now is that latency period, the gray area. Like people are getting accustomed to their behaviors and habits in this gray area. It's going to be harder to bring folks in, and day one, if they transition over, I don't know what the percentage would be. It's going to be significantly smaller than if they had launched this program 4 years ago when they legalized everything. And it's going to be more difficult to bring people over to change those habits to get them in. So I would imagine at the end of the day, like we've already talked about how the economics are incredibly challenging or flat out don't work in these siloed cannabis markets. It's going to become even more challenging for those early movers, early actors, early licensees within Virginia's market. And where does the pressure manifest itself? In the regulator's email box, phone calls,
Yeah.
like
Right.
it's so that's just another thing that they're going to have to navigate. Not that cannabis regulators haven't figured out how to handle pressures from all different areas. I just think it's going to be magnified here. Um, because once they got year in, they come out with their annual report. They're going to show slower progress than the last 4 or 5 states that made this leap, and they're going to have to answer to why. And I would be totally happy if they were just like, not a me problem.
Yeah, that's a you problem. Thanks for nothing. But also you're seeing some of the economies around that decision of vetoing and not advancing it this year. You're starting to see some of the implications of that, or the fallout from that, where operators that are in that medical space are not making expansions that they had planned to do, and so there's now business decisions being made in reaction to that. Where,
Yeah.
I just think there's a pretty good size cascade or waterfall of reactions that are going to come from that are also a regulator is not responsible for. Like there is a medical program in Virginia today, and it is being regulated by folks, and folks are going to make business decisions about the prospective adult use market that'll have implications for their medical market. And so there's a downstream aspect to that I just think is worth keeping an eye on. But as we said, Virginia is an example of a state market. It could be Virginia, it could be in any other state. These are sort of the political things that have implications for regulators that inevitably that regulator inherits. Like you said, is sort of responsible for, or held responsible for, despite the fact that it has nothing to do with them, and is very much a mom and dad are sparring at the state house, and we're just waiting to see what the resolution becomes and what hand we get dealt, and we'll go from there. And regulators are a resilient bunch. We'll figure it out as we go because we have no choice but to.
Yeah, and they're doing that right now. I do feel bad for the folks that are there now kind of manning the ship, because they put in a bunch of work. They had a bunch of conversations. They were doing a bunch of planning.
Exactly.
And now that's all for naught. Not that it's all for naught, because I'm sure they'll just revisit or pick up those conversations at this or early next year. Um, but yeah, that's if they were doing what they should have been doing, which I'm certain they were. It's not an insignificant amount of planning that went in.
You're
That's
planning for a bunch of uncertainty, and one of those uncertainties is that all of this is never going to see the light of day. And
yeah,
but we'll
exactly.
we'll be ready for it if it ever does happen. I did see something late last week that their General Assembly is going to consider potentially some budget language that might reignite this issue this session, but I don't know how much of that is a Hail Mary versus an actual plan. So if there's an opportunity to revisit it, maybe in or by July, um, again, I think
Well,
we'll see is kind of the
that I didn't see that. That could be interesting, because that could be feedback they're getting from the agency. Like in our getting ready for this, and understanding the turnaround times are probably still going to be pretty tight, even if there's some negotiation between the legislature's timeline and the governor's timeline. Like these things always happen faster uh, than they maybe should. Uh, Asking for some budget to start bringing in some vendors, starting to do some of that build out ahead of time, that would be huge for the folks over at the agency. So they're not stuck in those like 80-hour work weeks that we were for months at a time and trying to get these systems launched.
Well, and to that point too, and so two thoughts. One is you clearly don't subscribe to Policy Decoded, where this was covered, including the budget implications. But second part, and we'll put a link up if folks want to subscribe. But second part is, to your point on the planning aspect, these folks also have day jobs. They are primarily, and they are medical regulators.
Right.
And the other 40 hours of the week that's not during their day job is planning for that when our job expands inevitably. And I just want to at least acknowledge that a lot of regulators across the country, regardless of industry, too, to be clear, do that on a regular basis of preparing for these flirtations that policymakers have with new ideas, new policies, etc. All of that has to be borne onto some agency, and sometimes it's in addition to. Like we used to love at our CCC in Mass, like the other duties as assigned is probably the most important part of your job description, because inevitably you're going to have other duties assigned to you, and get all your other job done. But by the way, hypothetically, if we expanded your office by 50%, how quickly could you get that off the ground? And like, so I just want to acknowledge that planning for legalization, even though it's not part of your job description, is a thankless task. And so we should be the ones to at least say thank you.
Yeah. I mean, that's so funny you bring that up too, because when I worked in the legislature for 10 years, you like worked to pass these bills and then they're just like magically gone.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then when you transition to state government and then you have to implement them, you're like, holy shit, this takes a lot of work. What were we doing for 10 years?
Or like
Yeah.
I used to just call things like, this isn't a money bill. And it's like, well, you do have to regulate it. And there's no cost to the Commonwealth for this. It's like, I need 25 FTEs. It's like, oh shit, that's a cost? Oh, sorry. You need a budget for that? Ah, we'll get you a supplemental. And we used to joke that we'd
Exactly.
sprinkle some reform on it. Just reform.
Yeah.
So pivoting from Virginia though, because I think a lot going on across the country too. Virginia is not the only state in this, but also not the only level of government either. A couple other topics that we've seen around the country. Obviously, rescheduling is one we might get some time to, but I think we had hemp beverages and some federal stuff floating around there. I should sort of acknowledge and disclose I've obviously been pretty close to this topic as both states and the federal government consider it, but hemp beverages and generally the hemp marketplace is feeling the clock, I think, right now. Obviously, November is looming, but also looming is Congress. And will they or won't they? And also keep in mind they did, which is they changed the definition of hemp, again, pending a November implementation timeframe. But because Congress did, now I think a lot of these brands in this industry, and also we should acknowledge that other industries, the alcohol industry, be it wholesale or retail, they're also mobilizing and asking Congress that now that you did, can you not do that? So I'll let you go first because I definitely want to hear your thoughts on it. You could imagine you teased a soapbox earlier. This might be the one, but I promise I'll keep my powder dry until I determine whether or not you deserve
Yeah.
it.
I mean, I'm scared to share my thoughts here because I would
Yeah.
imagine they're at in direct conflict with some of your
Content,
your hopes
baby.
and your hopes and dreams here. But like, look, I keep going back to the fact like this was a loophole. It was exploited. It should be closed. Period. However,
I'm getting
I
the powder ready, so let's go.
yeah. However, having said that, there should be a willingness and appetite for them to do a deeper dive in this regard and actually come out with some type of framework and policy that works for these folks. But if and here's and I'm honestly not trying to be a jerk here, but if they can't get to that point, I definitely don't think they should be kicking the can down the road here. Just let's keep operating as is. I think there's like legitimate public health and safety concerns. I 100% understand that there are operators in this space that are doing it the right way and trying to go above and beyond and do it the right way. It's those groups that are not, that are ruining it for everybody. And I think that's just like, regardless of what industry you're talking about, it's just kind of it's gonna happen. And it sucks that that's the reality. But in lieu of Congress actually doing a deep dive here and coming out with words on paper and a framework to make this work in a responsible way, like, if they just kicked the can down the road or extended the time, like, I don't think they're going to do that. Could they do? I mean, I don't know here. I would love to act like I have a crystal ball, but I don't know what's going to happen. I just hope they end up staying the course if they actually don't do some serious work around this, which I can tell you that my crystal ball is accurate here. They're not going to. So there you go.
Yeah, but I think of all like the bets, that's probably the safest one, right? That Congress will do nothing. That's been, I mean, that bet has been better than like the S&P 500. Like it's going to do, Congress is going to find a way to do as little as possible. That said, they did do something this session, which, like you said, was to close the loophole. I think what it's done though is it's shaken loose this industry in a way that is kind of revealing. In so much as you're starting to see who the relationships are. And that's certainly, I mean, you look at Target is carrying these beverages at this point. You have to imagine there's two things I see from that. One is Target's compliance department is probably not small by any means. And they've run a risk calculation of, are we willing to put these on our shelves? And the answer has been yes. And they're also not putting things on their shelves that people don't buy. Right. So my wife and I probably do a regular trip to Target, and we always come out with more than we bargained for. But it's because they put stuff on their shelves that we are interested in. And so I think that's one indication of where the market is and where consumers are. But it's also now, I think, a good indication of like, oh, Target's willing to play in this sandbox, and they're willing to, like, so yes, they might say, sure, it was a legal loophole, but in that vacuum, a market emerged, and they are obviously partnering with a handful of companies that they're just pouring gasoline on those books, and that's a good thing for those brands. At the same time, Target also knows that their shelf space is valuable, and if and when November comes and goes, they'll just replace it with something else on their shelves, and it'll also sell because that's what Target does. But you're also seeing the wine and spirits wholesalers come forward, and so a national group of beer and liquor distributors.
Brewers, yeah.
And so those guys are getting involved and like putting real political capital into this. And you're also seeing, I think this is where marijuana regulators and operators are feeling, there's definitely some feelings here, which is there's a little bit of jealousy, I think, because why should they get to go right to a liquor store and have that broad consumer access when I am behind a frosted window and 24/7 surveillance, et cetera, et cetera. Like, that's just not fair. Okay, I hear you. That's true. But what they're also doing is taking arrows for you in the public sphere of these guys are peddling gas station cannabis. They're gas station weed and that sort of thing. And so I agree with you that broad strokes, there's definitely, you can see the motivation behind we've got to do something here. I think where I would dispute the broader approach to this is I would just differ on what I do. I don't think a ban across the board, but I've always been of the mindset that prohibition generally is a shitty policy.
Yeah. And we've talked about that before, and I 100% agree. I would think of this more as a temporary prohibition. While
yeah, that's right.
You know what I mean?
But I think let's get a framework together of what this actually looks like. And there's a few reasons to that. One is, and this is where I am, again, full disclosure, I'm pretty close to this, which is beverages aren't selling generally in a dispensary environment. It's not a liquor store. You're not browsing for your product. You're ordering it ahead online, or you're going and asking a bud tender to go get it for you. You're not grabbing a 6-pack out of a cooler. So beverages aren't ideal for that category or for that environment necessarily. And so what they might be producing is now a curious consumer that goes, never had THC and CBD before. let me go check out my dispensary and see what else they have. So that might create a new customer out of nowhere.
I think that's right. And I mean, we've talked about it before about what does all of this look like 20 years down the road. And I think Mackenzie and I have talked to you before about what a tiered out retail system would look like. And I only bring that up because you see states like, what was it, last week or the week before? New Jersey is basically hemp is cannabis. Like, you're all going through the same
THC is
pathway,
THC. Yep.
which wouldn't be a huge deal for these hemp beverages if they had that tiered retail. You know what I mean? Like, you're going to fall under this threshold regardless, and you can still go sit on the shelves at Target, 7-Eleven, whatever it may be. So it's just interesting, and I wonder if this is a catalyst to actually, like, if Congress continues not to act, if the hemp advocates and the industry groups kind of pivot towards that direction. Like, if we're prohibited, we need to find an outlet. The outlet could be through cannabis, but it doesn't work for the model that we're doing, and start to advocate at more of a local level for that tiered retail approach that we've talked about before.
I'm thinking long term here, and that's why, like, to your point about it being a temporary prohibition or some sort of
Right.
motivation to get folks to the table. I think if the objective was, and I'm not saying that it was, but if the objective was to get people to the table and say, we need the mature operators to reveal themselves, but based on that, like, there's sort of a bloodletting of some sort, or at least a separation of those that come forward and start advocating for. I testified in Rhode Island last week before their house, and one of the representatives on the committee said, so this is an industry that's asking to be regulated? Yep, indeed. It's an industry that's asking to be taxed? Yep. So why aren't we doing it? The point being, like, industries don't come forward very often and say, like, hi, please set standards for us and please tax us and our customers. And I think what she was saying, I don't love this idea, but one, we need the revenue, and two, you're asking for it, so I might as well grant you your wish. I think there's something to be said for those folks needing to reveal themselves, prove themselves, but also gain some political traction and awareness of introduce yourself to your member. Like, there's a civics lesson to all of this as well that I don't think we should lose or we should not take for granted, which is the more you know your representative, senator, member of Congress, etc., the better advocate you can be for your industry. But if you get into this space 2 or 3 years ago, you knew what you were doing, you knew the risk, and you might have thought the runway would be longer, but we're always going to have this conversation. There's always going to need to be standards because gas station weed was never going to last. And that's where I think it's time to cut bait on some of those folks and say, if you're selling 50 milligram gummies that look like candy in gas stations, yeah, goodbye. Like, you're not doing anyone any favors.
No room for you at the table.
There really shouldn't be. And I think that exclusion, though, needs to happen amongst the industry to come forward and say, we represent the mature operators in this space. You can deal with us sincerely. But the one adage I just want to dispute publicly, at least, is this idea that alcohol is opposed to hemp and hemp beverages specifically, because I think you're seeing WSWA, you're seeing BAMCO, which is a group of retailers like Target and Total Wine and More. They're coming forward and saying, we support this. I think that's an important distinction. And you're seeing states like Minnesota where their hemp market is vibrant. It's craft breweries, and it's retailers, and it actually predates their adult use market. But now they're seeing some right sizing as well, which is, how do we make sure our adult use market succeeds, knowing we have this existing hemp market somewhere, and you're seeing it become a political issue where, their delegation is, Senator Klobuchar is running for governor, and there's obviously going to be implications there. I think the most fascinating state to me, though, is Kentucky, which is, you've got Mitch McConnell, who is the architect behind the ban, also, oddly enough, the architect behind the Farm Bill. Yeah, right. So let me, grab the eraser on my own penmanship. But then you've got folks like Rand Paul, who is the staunchest champion for this industry. And you've got guys like Rep. Andy Barr, who's running for McConnell's seat, who's also the one becoming the biggest champion of this industry. And Kentucky's, hemp farmer market, as far as agriculture is concerned, is pretty prominent. So just a sort of a microcosm of this issue is, and also just to be clear, the White House has no preference between Rand Paul and Mitch McConnell. They preferred neither. That would be their first choice. And so just an interesting dynamic. And then we haven't talked about this CMS pilot program with, quote, full spectrum CBD, but that's a wrinkle in this. So the White House has a goal, which is this CBD pilot program through CMS, but the hemp ban triggers or sort of, implicates that, where full spectrum CBD itself would basically violate this new hemp definition. So a lot of stuff to work out between now and November, and just a little thing called the midterms are coming up as well. So, things are going to get weird.
Fast enough.
Yeah. It's fun times if you're in the hemp space. And by fun, I mean incredibly stressful and no exaggeration, an absolute existential threat to your business. And I just want to acknowledge, again, I work with folks in this space. I have a lot of respect for them, but I also know that there are bad actors out there that I think we just need to be honest about. Those guys absolutely have no business selling a consumer good in a regulated industry. So thankfully, I'm not the one sorting it out, but I do think it has to get sorted out at some point. That wasn't bad for a soapbox. I mean, I could certainly go harder.
Yeah, you've gone harder and longer and more boring before. I mean, it's an interesting conversation. I'm more interested talking about the midterms coming. Shawn, how many political text messages have you opted out of over the last 2 months?
None.
What?
I want them all. I will respond to every single survey. I will throw off your survey data with pleasure.
My God, I thank God that Apple came out with that stop and delete button. Nope. So you just got to tap it once. Oh my God.
Bring it on. If you are dumb enough to survey me, you deserve my results.
You're going to get the Sean Collins treatment.
Plus, I also know it's like the pay per click. So like, come on, that's like, you're sending me a text message to ask me to donate. Like, I'm definitely clicking the link, so you have to pay for it. Also, I'm not donating, so sorry.
Oh, yeah.
Also, I can't wait to get the main political airwaves hitting our Boston media market. So exciting. So looking forward to it.
Yeah.
Also, just to be clear, Susan Collins, no relation to Susan Collins. Auntie Sue.
No, if any of the listeners out there are like, what is he talking about? Like, if you don't know now, you will know about our U.S. Senate race. It's batshit crazy. It's just.
It's the reason we got rid of Maine years ago.
I don't have the energy right now for it. It's just like, what are we doing here?
Meanwhile, you've got Angus King, or is it the other Angus King? I'm not sure. Which one is it? They're both.
Yeah.
So, but Maine, look, midterms are definitely going to be, if you follow cannabis policy at all, you should be following the midterms, because massive implications for every aspect. Yes. Rescheduling, who owns your state house as far as Democrats, Republicans. But even like we talked about earlier, sometimes you might think, I'm going to vote for the Democrat because they're for cannabis reform, and you might not get it at the end of the day. So
they veto it.
Yeah. Time will tell. So
what's next, man?
Well, we're looking at the clock here. We should probably move on to different segments, because we were going to talk about Oklahoma a little bit and rescheduling, but I think let rescheduling play out. June 29th is a hearing at the DEA, so plenty more to come, and I'm sure we'll have some guests in the future that'll talk more about it, but don't want you to think we were ignoring it or pretending like it didn't exist. We are very much on top of rescheduling, but let's do a would you rather regulate.
Yeah.
Because I think our listeners obviously care more about what we think. So again, hi, Mom.
And yeah, there's a big caveat here with this segment. I don't want our listeners to think, okay, Sean's going to be asking, would you rather? And both options are not great scenarios. They're both, quite frankly, terrible scenarios. So I don't want any of our listeners being like, what a bunch of idiots.
What's your preference?
Why did you choose that? Why do you want that? It's like, if you're faced with these two horrible options, which horrible option are you going to roll the dice with? All right. I just wanted to get that out of the way.
If that wasn't obvious to our listeners, I'm glad you said that. But obviously, would you rather things go really great or really awful? Like, that's a pretty easy choice. So we want to make it difficult choices. But also, in fairness, Erik chose most of these. So we will, if they're good, it's a product of the hybrid podcast. If they're bad, whatever Erik's business is, that's the one you want to hold accountable. So would you rather, we'll start with market structure. And the first one is, would you rather regulate a market with 1,000 small cultivators, chronic oversupply, price compression, and constant distress sales? Or, now hold on, there's an option B. So before you choose, a market dominated by 4 vertically integrated companies with polished lawyers, political influence, and the ability to shape every single debate. So a market that is 1,000 paper cuts, or a market that is 4 companies that will just work around you?
Yeah. I'm going to be interested to see what you say here, but in, yeah, 1,000 small operators with oversupply. Um, One, when we created Maine's program, we tried to do the whole mom and pop thing. And I think we've been fairly successful with that. Although we do have some larger operators here, we do have a lot of small community based family owned businesses. And I really love that aspect of it. Um, the one that hurts here is the oversupply, because while you want those folks in here, there are going to be significant challenges for them. But I will say, like, I love how you added adjectives to that one to make it seem even worse than what we had planned out. But there are things that you can do to react to oversupply. There are policies that you can implement to help adjust that. But I think, yeah, I think if I had to pick my poison here, I would go with the smaller operators, have more of a collaborative effort around the things that would help address the oversupply versus, on the other hand, you do have, like, for large operators, the ease of actually regulating that, but just getting run over with bad policy that's out of line with your mission and everything you're trying to do as a regulator, I think, is the thing that would make me pull my hair out. So here I'm going the smaller operators.
I would say the same thing, and for a lot of the same reasons too. I think, um, in part, I think the consumer's better served by more options. Certainly, I think the smaller operators tend to have more investment locally. Like, they tend to come from the communities that they serve. I think that makes for a better product, a better um, curation of strains and menu, etc. I think it's messier, no doubt. It's a lot messier, but I think that sort of that messy growth is still growth nonetheless. And I think if you were to fast forward from 1,000 small operators with distress, navigating that and getting through that will result in a more resilient marketplace that's also far more diverse. And um, I just think that it's a moment in time, and you've got to work through it. Like I said, it's messy. As a policy person myself, as someone who sort of wrestles with this stuff, I think it's far more, it's definitely more interesting from an academic standpoint, but in the thick of it, I also think it's just far more um, exciting to kind of work through and get to know those 1,000 operators. And it's also more potential fail points, right? Like, I think 4 big operators means, like, God forbid there's one issue that happens with one of those operators for some reason. And also, I've been in enough enforcement dynamics with the shiny lawyer, and they're douchebags. Like, they
Yeah.
suck. And
Yeah, I do.
so I think the smaller operators gives you again a better long-term market. And it's not lost on me the politics of cannabis and how we got here. And I think to me that the spirit of 1,000 operators is sort of, in one way, is that's a sign of it's working. If you have 1,000 operators, like, competition will certainly breed results there, and curious to see how that plays out. But I think uh, a messy market today will probably end up with a better market tomorrow. So
All right.
so we're the same team on that
Sean,
one.
yeah, I'll ask the next one so it's not always me going first here. So for the second round of Would You Rather, intoxicating products, would you rather regulate THC beverages sold in liquor stores and convenience stores, which we kind of just talked about, or consumption lounges selling traditional cannabis products?
So let me be clear. I don't know that either one of these are bad options. So that caveat that you said earlier,
Oh, yeah.
this
Yeah.
might
See, you were making fun of me.
this might run counter to that. But and what I would say is I think they both represent an interesting, unique challenge to an individual market. They both bring their own individual concerns. Obviously, consumption brings the impairment concern. Low dose through liquor stores sort of violates the structure of our traditional cannabis markets, but I think in a progressive, good way. So I would say, for the sake of the market itself, I'd go option A, which is the low dose beverages through liquor stores and restaurants and convenience stores, because I think broader market access for cannabinoids generally is good for the overall market, the plant based market here. But I also want to respect that. As much as we think about consumption and even the cannabis culture historically as being a social product, I also think that cannabis consumption for some people is not necessarily a social thing. And so they may want to grab a seltzer, they may want to grab a beverage and go home because it helps them sleep at night. The last thing I would want to do is sort of force someone that wants it for that purpose. Um, Again, I think we look at them as a social product, but not all cannabis consumption is going to be a social endeavor or a social environment. And broader access, I think, long term is going to be how this market grows, expands to its full potential. So I do think both are viable, and I would, if given my druthers, I would say both. But because I want to respect your challenge here, I'll go low dose beverages.
I totally agree. I mean, this is a segue from our earlier, right? Like that's just
Exactly.
the future marketplace that we envision, the tiered out retail. There's a feasible way to do it, partnering with these other groups. There's way you can have oversight. You'll have multiple jurisdictions. I agree. Like the social consumption aspect or consumption lounges can be done. But I think there's a greater good for the low dose beverages in convenience store. So I'll
Yeah.
leave it at that.
Well, and we had restaurants in there too, which I think is important, where it's now potentially, I don't want to say commingled, but that helps remove the stigma of, if I can go out with my in-laws or something and they want a glass of wine and I want a seltzer, I think that helps with better integrating the product into society. So um, we'll do one more. Let's
We
do
can
one
do a
more.
couple more, but yeah,
All right.
okay.
I want to be respectful of your time, of course. You're a busy guy. So the third one here is, we'll do technology. Would you rather regulate a complicated seed to sale system that everyone hates, but gives you real time visibility, or a lighter touch of a tracking model that operators tolerate, but leaves regulators half blind?
Yeah, and I,
Careful.
um, yeah, yeah,
Today's episode
I,
brought to you by.
yeah, exactly. You know what? Pick the devil, because I lived it. I would go with a program with an overly complicated seed to sale system that everybody hates. Um, Only because, look, track and trace system. We won't put names on it. I mean, you hear the feedback from industry. There's challenges internally, but I will say, like, they are a treasure trove of data, and for
That's
somebody
it.
that has data as much as I do,
Yep.
you can make it work for your program and for your agency. Um, Not only making policy decisions based off of some of that data that lives in there, but also making operational, managerial, agency initiative decisions based off of that data that's in there, pairing it with other data that lives outside that you can pull in. So for data guys like us, because I think you're squarely a data guy, um, I would go with the overly complicated. Just navigate that. Work with your industry on creative solutions, batch tracking. Uh, that helps make it sustainable, livable, viable. I don't know what the right word is for both industry and the regulator, because I think you just give up too much if you give up that again treasure trove of data that those tracking systems provide you.
Yeah, I would agree generally as well. I think there's a lot of utility to the data you collect, as long as you commit to use it too. Like, I think the most insulting thing you could do is force the industry into that system and then just collect the data and file it away. I think the more you can embrace it and fully integrate it into your operations, to your enforcement posture, and those sorts. So basically, agreeing with you that the full visibility is the most important part to me, and But again, I would just ask, what do you do with that data once you collect it? And if you aren't publishing it or using it and
Yeah.
leveraging it, then I think, again, it's insulting to the operator that's actually probably employing, if not one, a team of folks to commit to actually remaining compliant with it. But you're also seeing it pay dividends right now, where DEA is crediting existing medical programs because of they collect this information and they regulate it as heavily as they do. DEA is literally crediting states with that by saying, come register if you're a licensed medical operator in an individual state. And what is DEA going to do? They're probably going to rely on that data, and they're going to want to reconcile it at some point. So I think that's where it sucks in real time. It's a lift. And bear in mind too, it's like, as much as it's a treasure trove of data, it's a rat's nest of data that you've got to unwind and unravel and sort of, I was a Boy Scout for a short period, and like, I hated the knots, and they're complicated, they're messy. It just sucks to get through. And this data is, the grandparent package and the parent package and all that stuff. Our compliance staff spent a ton of time working through data and just making it make sense. So yeah, I would agree.
Yeah. I mean, you bring up a good point too, before we go on to the next one, about, look, if you're going to make them use this system, whatever it is, you better be using the end result of it. And I think some states are starting to see that. And like, if this is going to be a requirement or a mandate, whatever you want to call it, for your operators, if you're not using it for what it's intended to, it becomes a liability. And I think I think states are starting to pick up on that. So a lot of cool stuff hopefully will be happening over the next couple of years with how they're using it, feature, all that cool stuff. So
let's I actually wanted to get to this one, which is the product safety one, because I think it's first and foremost and front and center as far as regulators are concerned. But you and I, we've talked about it a little bit. I think we should dig into it maybe even a bit more down the road. But would you rather regulate a state with recurring lab integrity problems, or, because, option A, door number one, how do you not? Option B, a state with constant packaging, labeling, and youth appeal violations? Which would you rather?
you want me to
Choose your poison.
you want me to go first?
Sure,
Okay.
yeah.
I'm going the second one. I would rather
Really?
regulate a state with frequent packaging and labeling youth appeal violations. Listen, like, again, caveat, neither one is great. But I just look at the lab part, and if you have the consumers, you have the industry, you have the general public start to question the integrity of testing. I mean, that's questioning the integrity of the entire system.
Sure.
And
Good
I
point.
think that does more for public confidence of what we're trying to accomplish here in the regulated system than repeat violations of packaging and labeling requirements. I could be off. Other regulators or people could have like differing opinions from that. That's the way that I view it. And I also think, like, integrity concerns is like a fundamental issue. Packaging and labeling you can address in one-offs, to whereas you can remediate some issues you have. Yeah, I mean, yes, I'm confident in that decision. And that's
Sound it,
kind of
yeah.
that's kind of where it's, yeah. I mean, do you want people putting packaging and labeling that appeals to kids? No, but you can take the authorities that you have to address that stuff. Not that you can't do that on the testing, but it just, anytime you get into testing, it becomes more complicated, more downstream impacts. And the way that the question is framed about the integrity of the whole testing regime, I think that's a huge problem. So I would rather regulate the program with the packaging and labeling issues.
So you might have been really persuasive there. I agree with you. What I would say is, if you are regulating option A, which is the state with the lab integrity problems, you are by definition already option B. If you have lab integrity problems, you've already got label problems. You've got, right, like, that's none of your labels are reliable. So you've already got that issue where your labels are bullshit
see
to
where you're
begin
going.
with. And so
All right.
I'm sort of bleeding A into B, but as a result, I would say, like, if you have option A, which is the lab integrity problems, you've got that downstream cascade of a much bigger, like, that's going to infect your entire system. And I think you diagnosed that. So as a result, I would probably therefore go with option B, because it feels like a smaller problem. And so I would say, again, you kind of persuaded me into it. But as a policymaker, I think the lab integrity thing is like, give me that because it feels like the more complex puzzle to solve and it's worth solving. So as a regulator, as a former regulator that's sort of now opining about a lot of this stuff, like that's the one I want to solve. And I think if I solve that, I solve those other little problems, or I'd like those little paper cuts down the road. I at least solve a good portion of them. And so I looked at this question from that lens of like, which one would I rather tackle and sink my teeth into? And I think lab
Yeah,
integrity is the one that needs our attention because, to be fair, states are dealing with both of these issues right now. These are live issues that both are dealing with, and no regulator would make like, they're not going to choose option A or B because they're dealing with A and B right now. So that
100%.
I
Yeah.
agree. I think that, like I said, I think you persuaded me into B would be the one I'd prefer if it's like which one gives me smaller issues. I agree with you there. So
Yeah. All right, let me ask the next one.
yeah.
This one is, I mean, these are all kind of tricky. This one is probably the one that I'll struggle with the most, but talking about political pressures, would you rather work with a legislature that changes cannabis laws every session or a legislature that refuses to fix obvious problems after the program's been implemented?
So I would say give me the one that does something every session. And again, these are which is like the lesser of two evils. Because the legislature that's stubborn and refuses to fix it, uh, is a legislature that is hands off enough that like you might have structural issues with your statute that there's literally nothing you can do about. Like, and I'm trying to think of good examples here. We had some stuff with like HCAs early on, the host community agreements, and whether or not the commission could actually review them. It was an actual legal debate, and we like some of the stuff was like blatant violations of that statute, but we as a commission were saying I don't have the authority, and there was a stubbornness, I think, on behalf of our legislature to give us that authority. If I knew that there was a bill that was moving, I could make a political case. Or alternatively, I could make a public case that turned into a political case to say there are 15 bills pending in the legislature. They're going to do a package of some sort. If this is not in there, that's a problem for us. So give me a legislature that's at least engaged, and I can live to fight and lose a political argument. But if you give me a legislature that is just completely like either turn their back or stubborn to the point where they're not going to do anything at all, like I just can't work with that. But if you give me someone that is negotiable, and let me be clear, your industry will also know that they're negotiable and they will begin to mobilize politically. They will start hosting fundraisers and making sure that they make friends in the legislature. So like, by all means, I'm not saying I would get what I want out of that legislature, but give me one that's engaged and I at least trust that I can make a cogent political argument for the change that's necessary. And if I can't, I lost. That's my problem.
Yeah. Well, this will be the first one we differ, and you did not convince me there. But I will
You're
tell
not a
you why.
legislator, so I don't give a shit.
I I would I would go with working with a legislature that is, as you put it, stubborn and refuses to really do anything, and it's really based off two of my lived experiences. One, I remember having a conversation with one of our licensees, like the second or third year in, just past delivery. And I think the office advocated for it or supported it. Um, and I remember him saying, "Yeah, I think it's great that you guys are doing this and we're going to implement it." He's like, "But it would be nice to have some time without drastic changes for me to focus on my business." Basically, like if I want to compete now I have to do delivery. Now it upends my plans, my finances, my budget, my direction. I remember him saying, like, "I wish we had more than 12 months of stability just to bring some predictability and understand what we have before we keep changing it." And the other one was like, if the legislature is changing it every year, I found that, and I would almost guarantee you're going to agree with me on this. 90% of cannabis bills that go through the legislature on a yearly basis are hot trash. They're dumpster fires. They're terribly written. They're terrible policy proposals. So I found that like 90% of my time at the legislature was killing bad bills, making
Sure.
sure that these
Yeah.
things didn't pass, as opposed to like advocating for good things and supporting good things and trying to build something good. So if you kind of work the math out, if they're always engaged, like more often than not, something bad is going to pass versus something good that is going to pass. And it just makes your life a nightmare, especially when we just talked about at the top of the podcast, like when we worked in the legislature, you pass these things and they just go off into this magical place. And then when you're in state government, it's more they come down with fire,
Yeah.
and now you need to implement these things. And so all of that considered, even if you had a stubborn legislature and they refused to fix like core issues, in my brain, we still have a program. It's still up and running. You can do workarounds. You can try to be flexible. The industry knows that you are not in fact, the person that is not trying to fix these things. So
Hopefully.
all of that
Yeah.
together. Yeah. Hopefully. So all of that together, I would go with the legislature that didn't do shit.
You should just get your governor to veto it afterwards, like they did in Virginia.
Yeah.
Now we're
Yeah.
full circle. No, I think that's
Yeah.
fair. I agree with you. I think what's funny is I remember back to when our legislature was not legislating on cannabis. They took a very interesting posture when they legalized gaming as well. They just didn't touch the statute for like 5 years. It was like a sacred don't even open that book. And they took a similar approach or posture to cannabis. And I remember thinking this, like to your point, like this will be a good implementation window. And we probably did regulations 5 times. So we were the ones who were like, oh, well, the legislature's not going to do it. Let's regulate again. And the industry had the same thing of like, the rules are always changing. Like our enforcement team was like, which version of the regs are we holding them against this
Yeah.
time? Like this violation was from 3 years ago, but they complained to a commissioner and got the regs changed. So I guess you're free. Off you go. So that, yeah, again, these are all, lesser of two evils. So.
All right.
So we talked earlier. This was going to be the no guest episode, and I think we survived it. But it's a no guest episode because we've got a whole series of episodes coming up where our guests are exciting. So, Erik, do you want to give that tease or?
Yeah, I don't think she would mind. She's gotten the green light from her, what she called them, her PR comms overlords. But
Yeah.
I think it's going to be a perfect timing to have Christina Dempsey come on from California's Department of Cannabis Control to talk about some of the cool things that are happening out in California. I'm sure we're going to talk about rescheduling, but such a large cannabis market always will be interesting. She's a friend, former colleague. She'll be great to have on, and it's going to come on the tail end of Canada because as we record today, we have CANRA, the external stakeholder meetings
Next week.
in Oklahoma City. We talked to Director Barry about that next week. So maybe there'll be some fun discussions coming out of that. I think Christine is going to be there, so the three of us can do some planning. So we have a great episode. But yeah, if you're a fan of California, you'll want to join the episode where we have Christina on.
And she's a policy wonk as well, and I'm sure.
Yes.
And like you said, California is such a market that as goes California, so goes a lot of the country, and they're wrestling with such a legacy market there. California's got such a deep history with cannabis policy and cannabis culture that, and I know that she appreciates that, and so does the entire department. But excited to talk to her, but also, again, as we continue to grow this program and have folks in our network come on, it's always good to have folks come in and talk about the work that they're doing, the work that we're doing, but also just try to peel the curtain back a little bit, like we have, and give a sense into what goes through the mind of a regulator, but also what they're juggling and how we can maybe just humanize that role a bit more. And Christina's a great example of that, where, like I said, she's a policy wonk, but she also realizes that the nuts and bolts of running a cannabis operation need to be considered. And I know that they've done some exciting stuff with rescheduling too, that I do want to talk to her about, trying to get ahead of that. How do you protect your medical market as it might exist and coexist with your adult use market in light of rescheduling? So credit to California for doing that work, and excited to talk to Christina about it. But also, like you said, CANRA's coming up. I'm sure you and I will be booking more guests as we meet with our friends and colleagues across the country and seeing who wants to maybe take the plunge and join us on one of these episodes. But any parting thoughts, Erik, before we give people their morning commute back?
It's 75 degrees outside here in the Northeast in Maine, sun shining. Get outside. Go enjoy life.
Touch grass. Yeah.
Touch grass. touch grass.
With that in mind, again, as always, we are excited to bring you this latest episode of The Hybrid. There'll be more to come. Until then, though, just do as you always do, which is like, subscribe, and hit that follow button. So, but thanks, Erik. Good to see you as always. We'll have to get out in the course at some point this summer and
Yes.
actually touch grass. So, but until then, we'll be back, like we said, with some future episodes, and keep on, whatever you do, just keep on doing that. So thanks, everybody.
Go get them.
Yeah. The hybrid. The hybrid. Yeah. The hybrid.